Alright, so it's been almost a week, I think, since my last video. I moved back on campus, so I've been trying to look for somewhere where I can go that's quiet, private, to record videos. And I've got this place for about 25 more minutes, so let's get right into it. This is going to be 5 fighters to watch on UFC 311. These are fights that are not necessarily under the radar, because people do know these fighters, but these are fighters that are kind of on the way up and fights that may be overshadowed by the big title fights, by your Marabs, by your Islams, by your Armans, by your Umars. So these are going to be 5 fighters that I wanted to highlight on this card. Fighters that I believe are very good with a lot of potential, and guys that I do believe are going to win this weekend. So let's talk about these fighters themselves, as well as their specific fights this weekend on UFC 311. So we're going to start with Peyton Talbot. Now, this isn't a guy that I've necessarily been the biggest fan of, but there's not much that I can really say that's going to decrease his incredible fight style, right? This is a guy that beat up on Cameron Simon, a guy that I was really high on myself. I thought Cameron Simon was going to go out there and whoop Peyton Talbot. Man, I was wrong. Peyton Talbot made that look easy, and the striking, wrestling was no issue for him. Put him down bad with a knee. Man, Peyton Talbot is just a good striker. In his last fight, obviously, he was fighting a bit of a can, but he put that guy out in, 12 seconds. There's really nothing better that you can do against a guy that is just out there for you to beat. To beat anybody in the UFC in 12 seconds, impressive feat. Now, there's still a lot of questions to be asked about this guy because in some of his earlier fights, there were moments where his striking didn't look all that decisive, moments where he did look a bit weak in the wrestling and grappling. But this guy's only 26 years old, still undefeated, with 8 finishes out of his 9 wins, 7 by KO, 1 by submission. This is a guy that you would expect to be making big leaps between each fight, especially now that he's at the highest level, racking up a bunch of good experience. And he is going to be fighting a 37-year-old man in Raoni Barcelos. Now, Raoni Barcelos is probably best known for another great young bantamweight in Umar Nurmagomedov that KO'd him. Kind of KO'd him the same way Arman KO'd Beneil Dariush, kind of like a knee into an off-balance hook, put him out pretty bad. Peyton Talbot is going to be looking to do the same type of thing, and I don't see any reason why he can't. Raoni Barcelos is a decent test, but a guy that you would expect, one of the most hyped up prospects in the bantamweight division in Peyton Talbot, to make pretty easy work of. I'm expecting a first or second round KO from Peyton Talbot. I think he's not really necessarily a newcomer in the UFC anymore, is Talbot. He should be at the level where he is putting guys away like Raoni Barcelos pretty quickly. I believe if he does prove that, he's more than eligible for a jump up, maybe even a shot at the rankings. I know bantamweight is deep, I know it's tough, but this is a guy that the UFC are going to want to push, and I'm behind that too. All right, and then next we got another bantamweight. We've got Rinya Nakamura. Now, this is another 9-0, under 30 years old, undefeated guy, but he has a much different style than the last guy we talked about in Talbot. This is a guy that was an Olympic level wrestler before he transitioned into MMA. Now, I don't believe he ever did end up going to the Olympics. He was training for the 2020 Olympic trials before that got kind of delayed, kind of postponed, and he ended up instead focusing into MMA, which is good for us because since then he's gone 9-0-0 with 5 KOs and 1 submission. So a 66% finish rate. Pretty good for a wrestler style guy. 3-0 in the UFC already. A third of his fights in his young career have already come in the UFC. All wins. That's a good sign for him. He's fighting Muin Gafurov. That's kind of a tough guy, but he's already lost, I believe, 2 out of his last 3. He lost to Said Nurmagomedov, which isn't the worst loss, but if you're going to be a top guy, you're going to beat guys that Said Nurmagomedov are beating. And Rinya Nakamura, he just has a pretty simple, kind of straightforward path to victory here. Muin Gafurov, like the name would suggest, he's a guy from Tajikistan. He knows how to wrestle. He knows how to defend grappling, but he's not that high level at anything he does. He's a decent fighter in the UFC, but Rinya Nakamura is a high level MMA wrestler. He should be able to go out there and dominate with physicality, with wrestling skill, and earn himself a decision. I'm not really thinking of finishing this one. I think this is a step up from Nakamura's last fight, so I would be happy with just a pretty dominant wrestling heavy win that proves that Rene Nakamura should just keep climbing those rankings, going up towards the top. One or two more wins in the UFC, and he will be looking at a top 15 fight, especially for a young guy in that East Asian market that they're trying to break into. So, Rene Nakamura, another young, undefeated guy to look out for. Alright, next, we got Bernardo Sopaj. This guy's in kind of a weird spot because he is best known at this point for getting knocked out really badly by Vinicius Oliveira, who is actually another great prospect, but it's way too early to give up on this guy. Even if you look at that fight, he was doing really well in that fight against a high-level striker in Vinicius Oliveira. He was able to mix in some of the wrestling too. This guy's only 25 years old. He was fighting one of the best prospects in his division, and he got caught. It happens. Out of his 11 wins, he has 7 by KO, 3 by submission. This guy's a 25-year-old next generation type of fighter that I talk about a lot in these videos. He can submit you, he can knock you out. He's athletic. He grew up watching MMA, I'm sure. He knows the game in and out. And at the age of 25, I believe he's the youngest guy on this card. He's still going to be making improvements, especially after a loss like he just took, where he was knocked out badly. He should be able to recover at his age. Only 14 professional fights. This isn't a guy that's taken Tony Ferguson type of damage. This is a guy that should be looking to improve and learn a lot from his losses. I expect a good win in his comeback fight, where he will be fighting Ricky Turcios on this card. I don't see much in Ricky Turcios, to be honest. I think he's kind of your average tough winner these days. Not quite good enough to make it in the UFC through normal means. Not bad that the UFC should cut him, just kind of a average, below average UFC fighter, win one, lose one type of guy. I think Bernardo Sopaj is on an upward trajectory, hard not to go up from his last fight, and that, I believe, means that Sopaj is going to make easy work of Ricky Turcios, show that he is still a good prospect in the division. So if you're a betting man, put some money on Sopaj. I think that loss kind of dropped a lot of his stock, but I don't think it really dropped his ability at all. So moving on, we've got Reinier de Ridder. Now, this guy's like an unknown prospect. None of these guys are unknown prospects, but this guy's a young guy like the others are. He's 34 years old. He was a double champ in his former promotion, which is probably the second biggest MMA promotion at this point. In one, he was double champ, I believe, middleweight and light heavyweight. Fighting at middleweight right now. He's a big middleweight. He beat GM3 in his last fight, which a lot of people kind of said he looked awful in that fight. He looked goofy. Yeah, there were times he looked goofy, but our champion at middleweight, Dricus du Plessis, also looks goofy, and he's pretty undoubtedly, at this point at least, until he fights Khamzat, the number one middleweight in the world. And I do believe that Dricus has a good chance against Khamzat, but we're talking about Reinier de Ridder. This is a guy that has proven that he can beat people regardless of his style. He has great physicality, and once he gets on the ground, he has kind of sneaky, really high-level technical grappling skill. This is a guy that has 13 out of his 18 wins by submission, plus 3 KOs. Now, I wouldn't really expect a KO in his next fight because he will be fighting Kevin Holland. This is a guy that has an iron chin, and Reinier de Ridder isn't really the type of guy to be knocking out good strikers with a good chin. He does have those 3 KOs, but those are mostly kind of cans. But regardless, I believe that makes 16 finishes out of 18 wins. This guy's a dangerous guy. And we know that Kevin Holland isn't necessarily the guy that's going to fight out of submissions on the ground. He's not a guy that's really going to give his all in the last moments of a fight to make sure that he's winning rounds. So regardless of whether Reinier de Ridder gets this finish in his fight against Kevin Holland, I think he will be able to at least dominate him on the ground. I think he will be able to take him down. This guy's going to look a lot stronger than a lot of people are expecting when he gets in there in the cage with Kevin Holland, when he starts to put his hands on him. And Kevin Holland doesn't really have that finishing on the feet potential that a lot of people think he does because of his highlights, especially lately. I think Kevin Holland's on a downward slide, to be honest. And I think Reinier de Ridder is good enough to beat a guy like that. And only his second fight in the UFC, so he's still a bit of an unknown at the UFC level. I'm backing him. I'd like to see him do well. I think he's an interesting guy in the division, and I think it's good to have around a guy like that. All right, then we've got just one more. This is going to be Jailton Almeida. Now, this is another guy that's not a new guy. He's not a young guy. Although 33 years old at heavyweight isn't one of the older guys at all. Still got like 6-7 years left, especially with his grappling heavy style. He's 7-1 in the UFC, his one loss coming to Curtis Blades. And regardless of how people think of his style, that is impressive. It's impressive that he's been able to pick up heavyweights bigger than him, although that is just probably 30 pounds of fat in most cases. This is a guy that walks around like 220, 230 maybe, and barely any extra fat on him. So he is able to just dunk these like 260 pounds on their head, 260-pound guys on their head. He has a really good finish rate with the submissions, and he'll be fighting Sergey Spivak, who I think is like I'd probably give him like around a 7-8 level heavyweight, around the 7th or 8th spot. I'd say Jailton Almeida, to be honest. This might be a hot take. I think he's probably the second or third best heavyweight at this point. I'd put Tom above him, obviously. Curtis Blades beat him pretty decisively, so you have to put him above. Jon Jones, yeah, he wouldn't beat Jon Jones. So maybe 4th, 5th spot. I think he'd give Volkov a good fight. I think he'd be a real problem for every single heavyweight on the ground, including Curtis Blades, had he been able to do more with those takedowns. So this is a guy that I believe will be fighting for the heavyweight title in his next 3 or 4 fights, because Tom Aspinall is kind of running out of contenders, which is crazy. But when you think about it, who is there left for him to fight? Maybe Cyril Gane, although Cyril Gane just came off what should have been a loss to Volkov. Hopefully that Jon Jones fights happens. Aside from that, you've got Mick Parkin and Shamil Gaziev coming up? No, the Jailton Almeida versus Tom Aspinall fight is eventually going to happen. So this is a guy that's worth watching, even if you don't find his style to be all that exciting, which I understand because some fights just aren't good from him. But when he is fighting a guy that he has a clear skill gap against, he is going to pick him up, slam him down, submit him within a round, which is entertaining. And Sergey Spivak, he is a guy that for a heavyweight is a good grappler, but being a good grappler for a heavyweight doesn't mean much against a good light heavyweight level grappler who's more athletic than you. Expect the Jailton Almeida finish by sub in this one. And I believe that's it for me. I'll try to be back with a video tomorrow too about UFC 311, but no guarantees I can get this place booked again. Regardless, I'll be back with more. I'll work it out somehow. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments. Tell me who you're watching on UFC 311. I'm excited for this one.